Welcome back, everyone. In this video, our goal is to demonstrate how to use the hydro erosion tool with our landscapes. Rain and water do actually sculpt the land that we live in every day, so this is another handy tool to use to give your landscapes a more realistically crafted look. Now, to find your way on over to the hydro erosion tool, make sure you've got your landscape tab selected. Come under the sculpt tab, and then in our listed tools, make sure you've got hydro erosion selected. Now we're picking right back where we left off in the last video, where we applied regular erosion to our mountain range here. And that just gave us a more sculpted, kind of a carved look to our range. And you can see some jaggies out here, which obviously look very unnatural. And that was fine for now, because we were going to use the hydro erosion tool to now start applying some wrinkles, if you will, to the side of our mountain. You see a lot of mountainous ranges having these sort of wrinkles because as rainwater beats upon a mountain range over time, it creates all these kind of crevices and wrinkles kind of going down the hill. And as we apply this, a lot of these jaggies are going to disappear. Now, before we get started using this tool, make sure that you have your intended layer selected and that the alpha value is set to 1.0 so that we're seeing the effects of our tool as intended. Just like a lot of the other tools, the tool strength basically determines how quickly you're going to see the effects being applied. So let me just jack this all the way up to 1.0. I'll increase my brush size here to be a little bit bigger. And as I left click and rub this over my mountainous range here, you can see that it is applying those effects of hydro erosion rather rapidly. Now, I like to think of this brush when I'm using my hydro erosion tool as a rain cloud, and I'm just deciding where do I want to apply rain again and again to my landscape. And as that rain falls, as I'm left clicking, how is it shaping, how is it influencing my landscape? So that's with the tool strength at 1.0. Let me just Control plus Z to undo that, and let me do my tool strength at 0.1. Now if I left click and apply the brush, it does create some wrinkles, albeit it does it a little bit more slowly. Okay? So I'm going to set this back to its default value right here. Now, rain amount, this is essentially saying how much rain is coming from our rain cloud. So in a way, this is kind of like a tool strength enhancer as well. So with my tool strength at 0.3, let's jack this all the way up, saying that this is going to be a heavy rain cloud. And I left click and I rub it through the little crevicey area of my mountainous range. Do Control plus Z to undo that. Now let me set my rain amount all the way down to 1 and left click. And I'm holding down the left mouse button right now, but my rain cloud, if you will, my brush, isn't dumping much rain. Although you'll see that it's kind of smoothing out some of those jaggies that were existing out in the landscape just a moment ago. So I'm going to Control Z that. So rain amount, how thick is your rain cloud? How much rain is it dumping? I'm going to undo that. Iterations. This is how many simulations, how many iterations we're going to apply to our landscape. In a sense, this is kind of like a tool strength enhancer as well. I like to think of this as how long is this rain cloud hanging out above my brush area. The lower the number, the less time it's spending in that area. The higher the number, the more time the rain cloud is beating upon that area. So I'm going to raise this up with my rain amount and tool strength at the exact same values, the default values. And as I rub this around, you can see how it's crafting those crevices, Control Z. Now if I turn the iterations way down to say 1 and I left click, again, it's as if the rain cloud is not hanging out above each area that I rub for very long. So I like to think of iterations as to how long is my rain cloud hanging above an area when I'm left clicking. So with some combination of tool strength, rain amount, and iterations, all these different levers that you can pull one way or another is going to determine how much rain is beating upon a given area. Now our rain distribution field right here, this is going to determine if it's going to rain in some places or others randomly, or if I choose the positive option right here, if rain is going to be applied over the entire area that my brush is. So to see the effects with this, I'll leave it at both for now. And let me just left click with all my default values otherwise. And you can see how it's kind of randomly just deciding where it's going to rain. Contrast that with positive, where rain is being applied to the entire area. And what this does is it seems to be a little bit more heavy-handed in terms of how it's going to create those cracks and crevices, those wrinkles in the side of your mountain. Let me just set that back to its default value. Sediment cap, this value I find does not really seem to do much of anything. So I rarely, if ever, even touch the sediment cap. You can play around with this, set it to its min or max value. I find it does very, very little. Combined layers operation. If you have more than one layer down here, and you have this checked, this will apply your hydro erosion to however many layers you have selected. Rain distribution scale. This is a fun one to explore. Let's set our rain distribution scale rather high and rub it over, let's say kind of where we're seeing some of this jitter right here. Left click. I don't see too much jitter, if you will, in my landscape. It's kind of creating just some smooth crevices. Let me Control Z. Contrast that where I set this way down to a rain distribution scale of 1.1. And now it's going to be a little bit more finely detailed. Let's set that back to its default. Now this detail smooth. Oh, you can see some drastic differences with this one. Actually, let's turn it off for the time being. With detail smooth turned off, and I left click, you can see how this maintains a lot of jitter in my landscape. Let me Control plus Z. With detail smooth turned on, I'll leave this at 0.1. Actually, and let me crank up my tool strength here a little bit to help enhance this effect. Something like, we'll do a hard value of 0.8. Left click. And you can see it still looks rather kind of jittery. I'm going to do Control plus Z. Very fine little cracks and crevices wrinkled into the side of my mountain. Now, if I set this to its max value of almost 1, and I apply this, you can see that this is going to kind of just steamroll things. So this is kind of like a flatten tool in a way. What I like to do is I'm just going to set that back to its default. Set this back to its default. I've got all default settings here outside of my brush size. So let's just say you're creating some crevices here in the side of your mountain, applying this brush all around. And you decide that some of these are flowing a little bit deeper than you really like. Well, then what you can do is crank up your detail smooth, and I'm going to go to something like a 0.5 and maybe make my brush size a little bit smaller. And then you can rub these over some of these bigger cracks and crevices here. And actually, let me increase my detail smooth a little bit to kind of undo how drastic some of those wrinkles are. Like so. All right. So this is a really good way to kind of flatten or undo or kind of fill in some of these crevices that just got away from you a little bit. All right, let's just undo these and set these back to our default, and I'm going to do Control Z a few times on the landscape to set it back to where we had it. And a quick camera cut here. Now let's try to put this all together and have a realistic look to hydro erosion affecting our landscape here. I usually like to have a bigger brush size if I've got a mountain range of about this size to just kind of get a general look of some hydro erosion in my mountain range. I'm going to go something like 5,000. Tool strength, we'll leave that at its usual. Detail smooth, I usually like to at least bump that up a little bit. as I just make my first few swipes. And I'm just going to left click and hold down left click a little bit, and I just released. And I don't do huge brush strokes to start with. Sometimes I like to work my way down an existing crevice to kind of enhance some of these wrinkles. Now, I've usually got my fingers on Control plus Z as well, because a lot of times as I'm doing this, I kind of get these little divots at the base of the mountain, and I just created one of those. So I always do small little brush strokes here, kind of working my way down some existing where there's a little bit of a crevice or dip, if you will, in the landscape, like right about there. And right about here as well. Always being a little bit wary of creating those divots, because it is super easy to hold down the left mouse button and then suddenly you get something like that, which is no good. Again, you can choose to fill that in by upping your detail smooth and rubbing over that, but I'd use small brush strokes and Control plus Z a lot when I am working with the Hydro Erosion tool. And sometimes I'll even go with an approach where I'll ramp up my tool strength, and instead of holding down the mouse button, I'll just do a click here and there. Let me just ramp up my tool strength. I'll ramp up my rain amount and my iterations, everything maxing out here. And then I'll just click a little bit here, a little bit there. That's way too much. Let me do the iterations much lower, actually. And that way I can get a little bit of noise in some of these areas. My iterations is still too high, and probably my tool strength as well. This is a lot of trial and error to make it look kind of how you want to look. Now, you may notice that if you try applying your Hydro Erosion, let me just set a lot of these back to its default values, over kind of a flattish looking mountain range like this. I'm just going to left click. I'm holding down the left mouse button right now. Not much is really happening to the side of the mountain, but you're starting to see some of these divots kind of appear at the bottom. Now, this is because if you look at this mountain right here, there's not a lot of existing cracks and crevices in it to begin with. I find that the Hydro Erosion tool works best if there's already some undulations kind of pre-existing within the landscape. If I fly around to the backside of this mountain here, you can kind of see these streaks on this backside of the mountain. If I apply my Hydro Erosion to this, what you'll notice again is this just kind of accentuates a bunch of the cracks and crevices that were already there. Now my lighting is a little bit tough to see, but it kind of took that existing streak and just kind of ran it on down the mountain. So in order to really give this a realistic look, I'm just Control Zing right there. I find that you almost need to manually carve in some cracks and crevices, some wrinkles into the landscape to begin with, because the Hydro Erosion tool just accentuates those. Now, getting this right on your landscape can take a long time. It's a lot of fiddling with values. That's why we aren't doing a I do, you do type of approach to these lessons. For me, my goal is to just show you what the tool settings do, so that you can then explore them on your own. A lot of trial and error goes into this. Do a lot of Control Z to undo if you're not happy with your brush strokes. Guys, that'll do it all for the Hydro Erosion tool. We will see you in the next video.